how one company has kept its supply chain operating during the pandemic. Mike McBreen is Chief Operating Officer of Rad Power Bikes. Hi, Mike.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to join the conversation.
And thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate that. You have a very interesting story to tell. Tell me about the problem that you encountered when you needed to bring product into the country during the height of the pandemic.
So as we continued to see the hyper growth of Rad Power Bikes, we realized the constraints posed by the global supply chain, specifically container availability and also the challenges of vessel space. And so as we worked with our sales and marketing teams, we realized that we weren't able to fulfill all of our customer demand. And so we had to think differently about how to move goods into the markets of Europe, Canada, and the United States. And so as we looked at the situation and as we understood the port delays, the congestion, and all of the constraints on the global supply chain, we investigated with our freight forwarding partner Expeditors an alternate solution which would allow us to take advantage of non-traditional shipping vehicles and also ports. And as we did that, that allowed us to think differently and come up with the idea of chartering a vessel and bringing those containers in directly into a non-traditional port like the Port of Everett, Washington.
Okay, well, let me ask you what you were doing before. What was the traditional? First of all, where are you sourcing from?
So Rad Power Bike sources from Taiwan, Thailand, China, Vietnam, and Cambodia.
Wow, multiple places. Are you parts and components or finished bikes are made in all those places? Finished units?
Finished bikes and components are sourced in each of those countries as we've grown our source base and as we've scaled to keep up with demand.
So already you're smart because you're diversifying supply. You know, you're not subject to any problem in any particular country, and yet that didn't make you immune to what was going on in the world. What ports did you customarily bring your product into in the United States before this happened?
So historically, we've come in through the ports of Seattle, Tacoma, in the west coast of the United States. We've come in through the port of Rotterdam for our European business, and we've come in through the port of Vancouver for our Canadian business. I
see. Okay, but this story we're talking about today is the U.S. domestic story, and you did in fact choose the port of Everett, Washington. Why Everett specifically?
Ironically, I live in Everett, and I live just above the port of Everett. And so looking out over Possession Sound, I kept noticing cargo vessels parked in Possession Sound for 2 weeks, waiting to get a berth in Seattle or Vancouver, as the case may be. And I'd look down at the break bulk terminal at the Port of Everett and say, wow, there's a terminal right there. Obviously, it's smaller. And so as we started thinking about how people move large equipment and trucks and earth moving equipment, we realized that there were vessels out there with, that could offload at a break bulk terminal that also had capacity to haul containers, and that's why we invested.
So they could handle containers. They had the cranes and everything, even though it was essentially a break bulk terminal. Port of Everett, I take it, was open to this. They probably loved the business. Did that happen? Did that go smoothly?
Absolutely, and they've been great partners to help us with this as we think differently about how to tackle the global supply chain constraints that are out there.
Yeah. What about the ship chartering? Any challenges there in getting a ship?
A number of challenges. Obviously, in today's environment, the dynamics of price are a consideration, but also just availability and the degree of coordination. I give a lot of support and recognition to our team and to the Expeditors team who engaged in a daily call to navigate through all those coordination and challenges.
Was this a dedicated ship just for you guys, or were you sharing space with other shippers?
We were sharing space with other shippers. Specifically, there were equipment in the hold of the vessel, the first vessel that we brought in, and our containers were riding on top. So that synergy of having our containers on top and then palletized equipment in the hold made for an optimal configuration to get the best value out of that cost.
But on the other hand, you found a ship with space on deck for your containers. I would imagine that maybe others might have gotten the same idea as you. Maybe there'd be a little competition for these such alternatives, or was that not the case? Were you just out there by yourself discovering this fantastic alternative solution?
I'd love to say there was a degree of innovation that came with it and thinking differently about how to use those break bulk terminals and the different utility lift ship vessels. But I think there have been people doing this, and you can see those container ships coming in and those smaller vessels now coming in with a higher frequency. It did require us to then, once we found that solution worked the first time, we're going to repeat that multiple times going forward. Mm-hmm. So that will augment our traditional supply chain as we struggle to keep up with demand.
You say augment, meaning that if things go back to what we might consider to be normal, if that word holds any meaning for us anymore, you'll go back to Seattle Tacoma ports for the lion's share of your stuff and use this as a backup, or what would be the balance going forward?
I think the balance going forward will use charter vessels as a tool to help us augment our existing supply chain, and then also as an incremental opportunity to catch up. That way we prevent congestion at our factories and we allow the goods to move more effectively.
So you got the port, you got the ship. The third leg of that particular important stool is the containers. Where did you get the boxes?
So we actually purchased the containers for the first charter vessel, and we'll be repeating that process. And then we found customers in market in the United States that we could sell them to. Ironically, from the moment that we started the process until the time that we sold the containers, the prices went up. So we were actually able to recover more of the value than we had planned. Mm-hmm. But obviously there is risk whenever you take on.
So you flipped the containers to a certain degree, not things that most investors would think about. But of course, going forward, if you're going to continue, you're going to need containers again. So you didn't hold on to those that you bought, right? What are you going to do in the future for container supply?
Great question. So part of what we're doing on our future charter vessels is we're actually going to hang on to them and then cycle them through multiple times. But we will continue to both lease and buy containers on a situational basis.
Yeah. What about longshore labor? That's been an issue too with COVID and the like, and a lot of ports being unable to staff full crews of longshoremen to handle incoming containers. Was that an issue at Everett, or did you have enough bodies to get the work done?
We had enough people to get the work done, but the teams were very transparent with us, which is as the cruise lines start ramping up and sailing out of Seattle, that puts extra pressure on those resources. And so we had to think about, how we're going to utilize that talent as a critical part of our supply chain.
Yeah. Did you face any bottlenecks or any other types of congestion away from the port, over the road, or I don't know if you use intermodal rail or not, but there have been issues reported there as well. Did you face any of that?
So we took the proactive step of diverting part of our containers. Of the 64 containers, the majority of them were receipted into either Sumner, Washington, or Savannah, Georgia, our two fulfillment centers in the United States. So we were able to coordinate that. But to your point, intermodal is highly constrained, and chassis availability is another serious constraint on the supply chain.
Well, how did you get the stuff to Georgia? I mean, did you ship the intact containers, those intact containers, to the Georgia facility? And if so, how did they get there? By rail?
Yeah, no, we took them by truck because of the urgency to get them in. So we bore the extra expense of getting them across the country so we could fulfill that demand on the East Coast.
So the price of not doing this would have been horrible, obviously. The lost sales, lost brand, unhappy customers going on to something else. But that doesn't mean that the price of what you ended up doing was cheap necessarily. I imagine it cost some extra premium amount to do what you did it not?
It did. And we made the strategic decision with the support of our board and Mike Radenbar, our founder, to bear that cost and go to market at the same prices that we always had, because the importance of delivering an unrivaled customer experience to our customers.
Yeah. Do you worry that telling your story in this manner and in other forums that you've used might wake others up to the possibilities of this alternatives? You might find yourself competing for space at the smaller ports in the future. You should have kept it a secret, in other words, right?
Yeah, it certainly did. But I think there's a bigger conversation than just our individual needs. There is
Mhm.
a, how do we open up more capacity for the global supply chain? And I think that's probably the bigger conversation that needs to be had right now. We've taken additional steps, like I said, to secure additional charter vessels, and we'll continue to do that. But at the same time, it's expanding the overall capacity of the supply chain.
Mike McBreen of Rad Power Bikes. Thanks so much for sharing your innovative story about how you managed to keep your product flowing during very difficult times and going forward as well. Thank you very much for being with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to engage in the dialogue and help our customers have an unrivaled customer experience.
That's rad. Thank you.